We are here for the midweek Bible class. Glad that you're with us. Word of warning, we are in John chapter 19, and we're about to start the story of the crucifixion. I will not do this as a gore fest. I will not linger on the most salacious, difficult parts of the story, but there's no way to tell the story without some descriptions involved. So if you have little ears in your car, you're listening to it there, or if you gather as a family to listen to the midweek Bible study, just be aware that little kids may have some questions or be very upset. So I'm going to let you choose what level your children are at and whether or not this is okay for them. And you can listen first, by the way, and then decide to let them listen later if you think it's all right. Is that good? Warning given? All right. John chapter 19, verse 16. Finally, Pilate handed him over to be crucified. Did he do this to save his own neck? Of course he did. But that's what they did. There was nothing unusual about what Pilate did. You could not have expected a different result. Not in Rome in the first century, the Roman Empire in the first century. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which is in Aramaic is called Golgotha. Here they crucified him with two others, one on each side and Jesus in the middle. Now, once you notice here, John completely leaves out the gore fest, which I find amazing. We often focus on the cross, as I think that we should, and the cross did so much for us and does so much for us and will continue to do so much for us. But the cross means nothing without the empty tomb. And there have been many attempts, I know of two serious ones in my lifetime, by marketing companies to create a symbol of an opening tomb or an open tomb that would replace or at least become as popular as the cross among the youth. And it just never has. I don't really know the reasons for that. I've not even seriously set about and worried about that. But the open tomb wouldn't mean anything without the cross. And so you really need the whole story. And now you've seen t-shirts with symbols, 4 or 5 symbols that tell the whole story as well. And that's not caught on outside of Christian circles. I don't see them outside of youth rallies or the like. The fact is it all works together. I'm not going to do the gore fest here because John doesn't. When we get to Luke will give a bit more that we will talk about then. Okay? Crucifixion was common. It was so common, nobody who lived in that area had escaped seeing a crucifixion, or at least the aftermath, because they were generally hung in a very public place. I mean, that was the whole point, was to terrify and pacify the population. Very normally right by the road. And unlike the pictures, they were not hung really, really high. Their feet were generally just a foot or two above the ground. And then they were leaned forward to create more pain. That was to create more pain, noise, terror for the community, but also to allow people to come and do as, let's say, the early colonists did in the American colonies when somebody was put in the stocks, that big wooden thing that held the head and the hands, and you'd sit on a narrow bench and people would come and throw slop on you, or worse, let's just call it a honey bucket, or they would taunt you and make fun of you, and that was considered entertainment. That was a good night out. Well, there are always people that are willing to mock and be entertained by somebody else's death. And before we get all to that's horrible, which it is, full stop, we might want to also consider our entertainments are often about shooting, dying, breaking up, all sorts of tragedy. And so we can do that because we can say, well, that's not real. And we have a point. But just realize we're not far removed from any of these people. All of us can become terrible people very, very quickly. There, but for the grace of God. It normally would take between 1 full day and 3 days for somebody to die on a cross, according to exactly how they crucified him. While the scripture says that in other gospels that the nails went through his hands, that does not mean that he hung by his hands. Normally, that was to create pain again, and to send electric type shocks, your muscles would just quiver. But you would be tied at the wrist to the cross. Other times the nail went through here, the wrist hollow, which they also called the hand. I say that because every so often I run across somebody who says, well, the Bible, you can't crucify a person like that because it would pull loose. They don't understand how crucifixions were done. Now we're going to move on, shall we? Because you know the story. We've done 2 Gospels already, and we've got another Gospel coming. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Now, was Pilate taking a big risk doing this? No. Rome didn't care who had a king. And Rome could not have cared less if Herod had another king, Herod's king, but another king of Israel. As long as that didn't create unrest, a lack of peace in the community, they didn't care. Normally, if you don't care and you let them be a king over their little group, then it'll either fizzle out or it'll grow to a certain point, and then when it becomes unstable or begins to threaten the peace, you crush it. And that might have been what Barabbas was guilty of. Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. By the way, if you go to Israel today, and I've not been, I was scheduled to go twice, and the war canceled it both times. Was not able to go this year when they were going to go, and I had the feeling it got canceled again on them. So I've not made it myself, but read extensively and watched I don't know how many videos from friends and from professionals. Right now there are 2 competing areas that call themselves where Jesus was crucified. There's actually a third one which doesn't get much credibility from anybody, I don't think. We don't know for sure. The guides in Israel really do try not to take you to fake places. They've studied, they are licensed and the like, but just be aware a lot of this was figured out 100, 200, 300 years later. Think of this. How many churches, Catholic churches, are built around relics from the true cross? Nobody was saving the cross. When Jesus was pulled off the cross, that thing was torn apart, recycled, used again, or burned. Nobody had any reason to save any of it. Why? They didn't expect him to be raised from the dead. They thought, end of story. There's no reason to save it. It's rather like, and again, I'm glad the little ears are out of the room. There are Roman Catholic churches that have relics. If you don't know, every altar has to have a relic. Generally, that's what I've heard. I don't believe the Council of Trent changed that. And part of some of the relics I've seen in Catholic churches or been told that they're under there would be things like the afterbirth, Mary's afterbirth, after giving, part of it, after giving birth to Christ. And people go, oh, that's amazing. No, it isn't. It could not be because, once again, nobody knew the story. Why would you save it? Nobody, but again, you could put all the pieces of the true cross together and build a pretty good bridge across Lake Pontchartrain, I think. So just be aware. A lot of silliness goes about here. Many of them read it because it was somewhere near the city. We think it was right outside of Jerusalem. It seems to be here. I would say the most popular one's probably the best guess of where this was. The chief priest and the Jews protested to Pilate, do not write the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be the King of the Jews. Pilate answered, what I've written, I've written. A lot of speculation as to why Pilate didn't knuckle under here. My thought is his wife warned him, don't have anything to do with this guy. This is an innocent guy. And I think he had decided he had done enough for the Jews. Now he needed to make sure that he had a wife when he went home. But that's my speculation. When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom, and that would, generally speaking, be like a linen shirt that actually encloses the legs as well. The top part of the legs, upper thighs, let's say. Let's not tear it, they said to one another. Let's decide by lot who will get it. All right, when I was a little boy, I was thinking, all right, the guy's got one set of clothes and you've torn one set, and now you're looking at the underwear going, well, that's pretty good underwear. This guy's been beaten. He's gone through the mill. It's got blood, sweat, and who knows what else on it. And literally, who knows what else. He didn't have one for every day of the week, shall we say. This is his underwear. Why would you save it? And the answer, as I learned early in studying history, is that people didn't have that many clothes. People didn't have clothes. They had one set, and they worked in that, and they worked in it. When it got too crusty, they washed it, and then they worked in it again. And I've been a couple places in the world where that's pretty much still the thing, but I think even there, the poorest places I've been to, I think they've got 2 or 3 sets that they rotate out. But do you remember Scarborough Fair? Simon and Garfunkel took an old English folk song and made it a hit and did an excellent job with it. One of the things that she's so wonderful, can she make me a cambric shirt? Notice something never mentioned in that one, or in a related folk song, can she bake a cherry pie, Billy Boy, Billy Boy? Do you remember that one? And perhaps you learned that in grade school. It's all about this wonderful woman he wants to marry, and the mama is, interrogating him about her. Neither in Scarborough Fair or in the Billy Boy cherry pie story are her looks mentioned. It's all about utility. Can she make something out of cloth? Can she fix you a shirt? Can she make a pie? And by the way, cherry pie, yay. Most of the time in British folk songs, when they're talking about pie, it's a meat pie, and some of the pie meats are bad choices. So what's going on here is that this is their reality. And this world is so strange for us that I really want to mention these things for you to understand. Nobody looking at this would have been going, really? All of this for a condemned man's underwear, which is incredibly soiled by blood, sweat, and everything else? Yeah? Where are you going to get another one? There's no Walmart. There's no JCPenney's. There's no Primark. There's no other where to get it. Yeah. In fact, you would give your cloak, which is your outer garment, for surety to pay a debt. And in Jewish law, whoever you gave it to had to give it back to you at night so you didn't freeze to death. Because you didn't have another one. It's really, we are richer than we imagine. But this happened that the scripture might be fulfilled, which said, they divided my garments among them and cast my lots for my clothing. Psalm 22, we looked at that sometime back on a Monday morning message. So this is what the soldiers did. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and a disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Dear woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. I was always told the disciple that Jesus loved was John, and that the reason he put it this way, didn't name himself, was his innate humility. But there have been some studies done on it. I don't want to go there because it removes us from the story. I'll just say that the leading candidate for this individual is Luke. And also as one of the men on the road back from Emmaus, or the road to Emmaus, and he's brought back to Jerusalem by Jesus, would have been Luke. A lot of reasons for that. And when we read Luke, we'll get into it. But if you want to know now, you can pretty much Google the disciple whom Jesus loved, Luke, and you'll find the arguments for it. But if I get to heaven and find out it's John, will I be disappointed? No. Let's find it interesting. Later, knowing that all was now completed, and so that the scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." And with that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Now, it was the day of preparation, and the next day was to be a special Sabbath. Because the Jews did not want the bodies left on the crosses during the Sabbath, they asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down. Again, little ears out of the room. Why legs broken? The only reason you stayed alive as long as you did was because you could pull up on your arms and take a breath. And then because of the pain in your hands and arms, you would release and your feet would have to hold you. If you didn't do that, if you didn't pull yourself up, every so often you would suffocate because of the way you were stretched out. That was the only way to breathe. And so it was a continual writhing, a living testimony of horror for anybody that might contemplate going against Rome. If you break the legs, they can no longer push themselves up and use their arms to pull themselves up to take a breath, so they suffocate. Believe it or not, that was considered merciful, was to break their legs to end it within minutes rather than days. I don't like this story either. I thank God that Jesus went through it for us, but it doesn't mean I like the story. I've heard too many preachers preach this as if it's their favorite thing in the world. And I'm just, I saw The Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson's movie, once. And I'm going, you're showing the worst part of the story, but you're not showing any redemption. And I know it's his movie and it did great. And I'm sure it did a whole lot of good for a whole lot of people. But I feel like we're not telling the story right. John just, it's done, here we are. Because John wants to get somewhere else. I like John. The soldiers therefore came and broke the legs of the first man who'd been crucified with Jesus, and then those of the other. But when they came to Jesus and found he was already dead, they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. I've been told, well, that's proof of death, is what he was doing. Kinda. The way it was told to me as I was a boy, when you die, blood and water mixes together. That is not true. It is not true. Let's do this two-parter. The spear went in to make sure he was dead. That's all. The Romans were experts at killing. They knew they really were the world's expert at killing and at crucifixion. And so it was very methodical. They understood how it worked. Everybody knew their part. He rams it in and hits the heart. Jesus literally died of heart going, breaking open, a broken heart, if you want to say. Did the spear help rupture that heart? Probably. But that's when they saw that, they saw he's dead, no flinching, he's gone. And they wouldn't have given him a second look. They would have forgotten him within an hour because they've got somebody else to kill. Right? It was that much of a killing machine. The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies that you also may believe. This may again be talking about Luke. Luke will then write a book where he'll put this in it, but without naming him as being the witness. These things happened so that the scripture would be fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken. And as another scripture says, they will look upon the one they have pierced. That's back in Psalm 34. You see it in Exodus 12 and Numbers chapter 9 as well. Later, Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. Now, Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, because he feared the Jews. With Pilate's permission, he came and took the body away. He was accompanied by Nicodemus, the man who earlier had visited Jesus at night. Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. Taking Jesus' body, the two of them wrapped it with the spices and strips of linen. This was in accordance with Jewish burial customs. If you're not getting a picture, what you would do is you'd cover the body with spices, and then you would wrap a strip of linen around each part. Then you would cover that with spices. Then you would wrap again. The reasons for this was to show honor. 75 pounds was a lot of spices, so a lot of linen as well. This would have been a very heavy body by the time it was done with it. But it was to show honor and to keep the smell down. And they were showing honor. Just by the way, when you have a loved one die and you've not pre-prepared, they're going to try to sell you super expensive caskets. Please don't do that. It doesn't show any more honor and glory than if you cremate them or put them in a cardboard box. It just doesn't. I have been with people when funeral directors were basically, you could have this one because it's this, but if you don't love him that much, then you could do this one. It's just, And by the way, I have a couple of Christian friends who are funeral directors, and they're appalled by that kind of behavior too. They're good guys. Taking Jesus' body, they did this. At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden, a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. Because it was a Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. Had to get this done. Have to get it done because when sundown hits on Friday night, Sabbath begins and no work can happen, and Passover has to happen. The people who are burying are not going to be able to celebrate Passover because they're going to be unclean. They're not going to be able to get clean and approved by the priest in time. So they're sacrificing here. Well, we move right on into chapter 20. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." Let's just do this real quick. I read the Passover plot when I was just a boy. My dad didn't know. I found it in his library. And that was a book that was very, very popular in the middle of last century, saying this is all a Jewish plot, that the disciples all arranged it, that Jesus didn't really die on the cross, and he was hidden away. And there were several others like that were written back in the 1900s. I don't know that any of them are still in print, but I'm sure you can find used copies. Excuse me. And the internet is forever. So people are still posting things such as, he didn't really die, he swooned. Now, after not eating or drinking for days, being whipped, shredded, his body and back and head, then nailed to a cross, and he's there for quite a while, then rammed with a spear. Then he is wrapped in 75 pounds of spices plus the linen cloth spacers around each layer of spice. And then the cool of the tomb wakes him up and he fights his way out of there. Have you ever been wrapped up in something? I had older sisters. I got wrapped up in a carpet more than once. And when you're wrapped up in a carpet, let me tell you something, no matter how strong you are, you're not getting out. No. Others will say they went to the wrong tomb. Really? This is where the crucifixion was. A garden is nearby with an unused tomb. These are unusual events. They tend to fix in the mind of people. Everybody knows where that body was. Nobody's going to the wrong tomb. The stories that people tell to try to get away from the resurrection require more suspension of belief than the resurrection. It is, as one person a long time ago said, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. I don't have enough faith to deny the resurrection. There's just too much there. Too much effect for there not to be an adequate cause. Well, she comes and she tells Peter and whoever this is, John or Luke, they've taken him away. I don't know where they put him. So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. There's one of the reasons why people say this is probably John. He's just saying, I got there first. Peter, however, runs in first. He bent over and looked at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter, who was behind him, just Doppler effect, arrived and went into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the burial cloth that had been around Jesus' head. The cloth was folded up by itself, separate from the linen. So this place isn't trashed. The head cloth has been folded. Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. So what he believed, we're not really sure, but he believed something. He believed that something miraculous had occurred. We have about 5 minutes. We can do this next section, and it's one of my favorites. Then the disciples went back to their homes, but Mary stood outside the tomb crying. I love Mary Magdalene. I hate what Dan Brown and others have done to her by painting her as this fallen woman that Jesus then marries and runs off and has a kid with in France. I mean, just please leave her alone. She bent and looked over to the tomb and saw 2 angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, woman, and again, woman, if I were to say it in American English, say woman. I don't know why, but that's considered an insult. You would say ma'am, or you'd say madam or lady, or excuse me, miss, something like that. In this day and time, it was a mark of respect. Woman, why are you crying? They've taken my Lord away, she said, and I don't know where they put him. At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize it was Jesus. Woman, he said, why are you crying? Listen to the questions. Who are you looking for? Remember we talked to you about the questions? Always pay attention to the questions. Who are you looking for? Are you willing to take the Jesus we have, or are you going to hold out for the Jesus you want? We talked about this just in the last couple of weeks. Thinking he was the gardener, she said, Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you have put him and I'll get him. Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned toward him. She recognized, because the way he said her name, and cried out in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. He says, do not hold on to me, for I've not yet returned to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I'm returning to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. You've not been where? You've not yet gone to the Father. Well, there are 2 big theories about this phrase. One is the harrowing of hell, that Jesus went into hell and preached the good news to the people trapped there and saved them. That's in the Apocrypha, and there's a little mention of it in Peter's epistles. Jude would have if Jude wrote more, because Peter and Jude basically wrote the same book, and we're reading the same books of the Apocrypha. And that could be true. Another one is the phrase, do not hold me. Terrible. Some of the older versions said, touch me not. It's not what it meant. It basically goes, let go. This is a fierce hug. And the second theory is not the harrowing of hell, is what he's talking about, is that it's Jewish humor. I'm not dead yet. Don't make me dead. We don't normally get Jewish humor because we're not Semitic. Most of the audience here is not, and I'm certainly not. I don't care which one you go to. I just love the humanity that the first person Jesus reveals himself to is a woman that no righteous person would talk to. It was a person that they judged because she was fallen. She had demons. That's who Jesus reveals himself to first. And then she is the first evangelist of the risen Christ. She is the first missionary for the risen Lord. He says, go tell the brothers that I'm here. And I'm in the process of returning to my Father and to your Father. Mary Magdalene went to the disciples of the Jews. I have seen the Lord. And she told them that he had said these things to her. Well, we know in other Gospels, they didn't believe her. But I'm going to leave you with that thought. Of all the people he could have shown himself to, Mary, his mother, John, the disciple or apostle that seems not to have left him, or Luke, he goes to Mary Magdalene. I think if the Samaritan woman had been nearby, he would have gone to her. Or if the woman who had cried over his feet and anointed them with spikenard when she was at the Pharisees' party, he would have gone to her. And if you are overburdened with sin and guilt and flaws that you just cannot seem to tame or get rid of, and you despair that you will ever be better, take comfort in knowing Jesus would come to you first and say, it's okay. I've got you. Let's go see the Father. There's a thought to hold you for a week, and we'll see you next week. God be with you.